The thing about going for continuous fireballs is that if you're shooting a continuous fireball this way, your opponent is either going to try and perfect parry you, right? Or he's gonna try the more obvious option, which is jump at you. If your opponent decides to jump at you now, you as the opponent have to be ready to anti-air them. This is the key crucial part to any sort of zoning, is that if you're going to go ahead and zone your opponent, you also have to be prepared to anti-air your opponent. Once you're able to do this, then it opens up a world of offense, and it makes your zoning that much scarier because your opponent has to be more cognizant of the fact that you'll go for a fireball. We felt like helping out the hat people today, so we're going with some Terry. Okay, so I took some time to watch over what you're doing for the first little instance, just to see what we like to do. And what I'd say is that first and foremost is that you don't have a game plan. That's okay, we'll get there with time, but let's start developing that game plan now, okay? Right now we're spending a lot of time jumping. We just go for a random option. I'm glad that we have an understanding that this is only safe and not plus, meaning that we're not actively pressing buttons afterwards. That's a good start. The other thing that we need to make sure that we're doing a little bit more often is number one, anti-airing, because of course anti-airing is always going to show up when it comes to platinum play. Anti-airing is going to be something that you're going to have to hyper focus on a little bit more, just because a lot of your opponents are going to be jumping because they're uncomfortable in the neutral. The other thing we're going to have to learn how to do in this instance is that when we jump in, what are our options? What should we go towards? What shouldn't we do? And kind of go from there. So in this instance, right after you go for a jump in like this, right, you could either walk in and go for a grab. You could try and walk back. The reason why we walk back is if your opponent throws out an EXDP, then we can punish it with standing heavy kick and then get the power dunk or whatever have you, right? We could also try to go for a normal afterwards just because we can, but ideally we don't want to be like hitting something like sweep or anything like that, anything that's super committal, or worse set, anything that will whiff, right? Crouching heavy punch is not a good option because there's not really much you can go off of this from, right? So ideally you want to use either your crouching medium kick into something. If you want to go into crack shoot, that's a decent option, right? If you're successful, you get something. If you're not successful, that's fine too. You could also go for your standing medium punch, standing heavy punch target combo, because it spaces you out from your opponent a little bit, right? And then if they try to go for something, then we could potentially whiff punish it if we're in the right spaces for it. So if you clicked on this video, I'm sure you need some help. Lord knows I did at some point. But here's the thing, you want your favorite content creators to come and help you, but let's be real, they're charging like $60 per hour. You don't need that, but when I got you good. Over on this channel, I do free coaching sessions on Tuesdays and on Thursdays at 6:30 p.m. EST. So what does that look like? I essentially go over your matches. I give you tools so that you can succeed the next time you open up rank. So once again, join my Discord. Wait till I'm live either on Tuesdays or on Thursdays, 6:30 p.m. EST. Be there or be square. Back to the video. Okay, another thing that we don't want to do is when we're in the neutral here, we don't want to just go for a sweep at like random points. It may have worked out in gold, however, now that we're in a little bit higher of a rank, we're going to need to use other options. Okay, so let's suppose we're in that instance again. An option that is very tried and true and will help you a lot more times than not is to simply go for a drive rush into crouch jab. Okay, the reason why we go for the crouch jab here or the stand jab, either one works. All right, the reason why we choose this option is because number one, you're +3 in their face. and then you can go for your offense, whatever you want to go. If you want to go for a throw, they technically can't mash out of it. They can go for a DP or a super out of it, but they can't use a normal, right? The other thing we can decide to do is that if they catch on to the fact that you're going for throw a lot, then you can also walk back out of this range and go for a whiff punish as well. So that's why generally your offense is going to be started around going for a crouching medium kick, low forward, just because it just gives you so much value while you're playing the game, right? You'll be playing the game. Obviously, you'll get like a whiff punish here and there. But the goal is to get this started, and then once you do that, then you can drive rush again, right? That's how you're going to structure your offense, right? Between going for throw, walk back into a button, and also using your standing medium kick to control space. Those are going to be how you're going to control, and this is going to be the basis for how you're going to structure your offense. Okay, so I always have to make a point to mention this because it's so important. Okay, so you went for power wave, which is cool. I have zero issues with this, right? If you go for this option, the thing about going for continuous fireballs is that if you're shooting a continuous fireball this way, your opponent is either going to try and perfect parry you, right? Or he's gonna try the more obvious option, which is jump at you. Okay, if your opponent decides to jump at you now, you as the opponent have to be ready to anti-air them. This is the key crucial part to any sort of zoning, is that if you're going to go ahead and zone your opponent, you also have to be prepared to anti-air your opponent. Once you're able to do this, then it opens up a world of offense, and it makes your zoning that much scarier because your opponent has to be more cognizant of the fact that you'll go for a fireball, right? Or they have to make an anticipation on when you're going to go for a fireball. And if you don't go for a fireball and they try to jump at you, that's a free anti-air. Clean as can be. Just wanted to add in one last part here, is that even though you say don't have your anti-air DPs together, another option that you can exude is just using your crouching medium kick. Okay, the crouching medium kick, it gives you immense value, right? It's not the same as a knockdown from a DP, because like now you can make them guess and whatever have you, right? But it is a decent option nonetheless. It'll still be able to get your party started, especially if your opponent can't check dive rush, right? You can also use it as a tool to anti-air as well, just until you get more comfortable with anti-air DPs. So this is going to be one of the hardest parts when dealing with parry, is the fact that you need to be very mindful of what spacing you're at, because it changes. The route you went for takes into account the fact that you're into the corner, and it's hard to convert from here into something that's meaningful, right? So instead of going for like technically the optimal route, just go for something that you can guarantee that you're in the corner, and then start your offense from there, right? That'll give you more value than trying to go for the most optimal situational thing. Just because we're not technically there, we're still trying to put our combos together and still trying to put everything together. It'll just be a little bit easier for you in that regard. And one thing you can do, okay, what you can do is that when you're starting, when you go for an option like this, right, and this goes for any sort of like safe option, what you can do is that, you know, you can tap a little parry. Why do you tap parry? Just in case you get a little something, right? If you're successful, you know, you get a whole thing, a whole route off of it. But if you're unsuccessful, nothing really happens to you, right? Right? You get a whole route off of it just because you tapped it. And then, you know, it would definitely be good to use, every so often, because what will also happen is that your opponent will, if they try to adapt, they'll try and walk up grab, and then if they try to walk up grab, that's when we can start trying to mash our crouch jab in those instances, causing a guessing game to initiate there. So those are the types of mind games you want to keep in mind. All right, let me show you something that's very easy, very simple, and it is super effective. Okay, after you're through, okay, you walk up and you go for another through, and you do it again. And you do it again. The reason why this is good is because it scares your opponent, right? It also goads your opponent into taking an action. If they just sit there, then they get grabbed. Then eventually what you can start doing is that you can check them with your standing medium kick instead of going for an option, right? So it's adding an extra layer of offense that wasn't there previously, and it makes your opponent a lot more scared. So one thing that we gonna need you to start doing is the fact that off of a knockdown situation, you need to be drive rushing, right? I'm not saying that we get to the point where we're doing hitting the instant drive rushes or whatever have you, right? But simply being able to drive rush at your opponent, all you simply have to do is hold tap parry while you're in recovery and then go for it afterwards, right? That's simply it. That's it. You hold parry, you tap dash, and then the moment you get close to them, you press your stand jab or your cross jab. Don't use other options unless you truly feel like you're not gonna get there in time, but generally you want to go for this just because it leaves you close enough to to add the threat of throw. If the threat of throw isn't there, you know, your opponent is less likely to try and go for something immediately, right? Let's talk about this instance right here. This was a really good instance from you, but I want to highlight this just because you can be implementing this a lot more often and it'll get you a lot of value, right? So off of this instance where you get knocked down, you wake up and go for a crouching medium kick. The mind game that's there, you may or may not have been aware of it, but the mind game that's here is that if your opponent is trying to bait out an option, right, they are thinking about, let me walk back out of this instance because they don't want to hold anything that you got going on, right? So it's like, okay, I'm gonna be the smart guy, I'm gonna walk back. If you try to go for a crouch jab, right, it may whiff, it may not, depending on the situation dependent. Let's talk about how this influences the game, because now your opponent has walked back. You cannot walk back and block your feet at the same time. So if you wake up with a crouching medium kick, you now have an opportunity to blow up their feet for trying to walk back. This is a great option. I'm actually going to add a little bit to that where you don't wake up with it immediately, but instead look to slightly delay it just a hair. The reason why we want to slightly delay it just a hair is just because in the case that your opponent goes for say an option like throw, right, you either get counter hit or you just get it outright, right? The important part there is simply the fact that you're not getting punished countered for it, right? So let's talk about why it's important to slightly delay it. The slightly delay is for the fact that if you're crouch blocking like this, right, and they walk up and go for throw, the most you'll get is a counter hit off of that instance. And granted, they can, depending on your opponent, they can get a lot of value out of it, but we want to make sure that if they, in the case that they do decide to walk back, we are ready to go for something and blow up their option. This is just a quick note that I'm going to add in there, is that if you're going to go for a crouching medium kick target combo, just keep in mind that number one, your target combo is unsafe, and you can simply go for an option like crack shoot, right? And if we're successful here, we can actually blow up our opponent. So right now, the way you play the game is that you're very uncomfortable with using your normals as an approach tool, okay? So using options like your standing medium kick, like your standing heavy kick, and simply using raw drive rush. Don't forget that raw drive rush is an option as well, right? Going for raw drive rush is an option, and it should be kept on your roster, right? Another option that we are not utilizing nearly enough is just simply going for low forward drive rush. I know people complain all about it all the time, but it's going to be what gets you in, right? We can use crouching medium punch, but crouching medium punch isn't as good. So ideally, you want to be using the option that's going to get you where you need to go, because right now all we're choosing is jump all the time. Because we're choosing jump all the time, it makes it fairly easy for our opponents, once we get a little bit higher, to simply just anti-air us. And in those instances, we're just going to be like, wow, we're just going to keep losing to it. So using options like drive rush, right, which you started off with, which was good, but we didn't show it any point past that, right? Using our crouching medium kick. If we don't plan on approaching but simply playing the neutral to check them, we can use our standing medium kick to do that as well, right? We can also use our standing heavy kick, and if we're successful, right, if we're successful with one, we get a whole route off of it as well. These are the types of things that you need to be using. So off of this last exchange here, you went for a jump and tried to walk forward into throw, right? Obviously, going for throw is not a bad option, but the thing is, because you're so far away from your opponent, that's why it was unsuccessful. Because you're so far away from your opponent, there's going to be a couple frames while you're walking where you can get interrupted, and a lot of players, when they're in a situation like that, they're going to default to either pressing throw or they're going to default to pressing crouch jab. So in those instances, right, we want to choose an option that will get net us a little bit of a catch, right? Even like a crouching medium kick into something, right? Just because it pushes your opponent away if you're successful. And a lot of these players won't know the answer to options like this, right? So what we can do is fall down one button and then check them with standing heavy punch into H fireball, just because if they happen to block the H fireball, right, we're plus. But sadly, in this case, when you went for your jump here, you went for a walk forward, you got hit, and then afterwards you get hit with low forward. We went for a quick burn and got hit. I hope this helps. It's just basic fundamentals that we need to work on. And with that being said, any questions?